Since when did Russia become the driver's seat for OPEC Plus?
Well, I think they do play a very important role, as you've seen in December as well, because I think Saudi Arabia is not going to do anything unilaterally. And Russia does represent the biggest of the non-OPEC countries. And the reality is they are the main ones that matter when it comes to the non-OPEC countries. But I don't really think they're saying anything different. Of course, Saudis do have a preference to keep the cuts going and just coming out and announcing it straight away. But there are a lot of uncertainties right now, particularly with Venezuela, which wasn't even a consideration when they had done the cuts back in December. So I think people are just buying time over here. That's the only thing. I don't think Russia is really dictating policy. I got the sense talking to our sources there that this was very much from other countries as well, not just Russia.
Amrita, as you look at the various variables, aren't most of them to the upside in terms of the price of oil? Let's say Venezuela, we don't expect that to turn around right away. Iran, it looks like the United States is not going to be imposing quite the same sanctions as we had. Are the risks to the upside or the downside?
I would say the risk to flat price should be to the upside over here, just given the fact that we haven't built inventories in Q1 despite refinery maintenance. Venezuela, as you say, continues to decline. And yes, we don't expect Iranian waivers to be going to zero at all in May, but we still expect a small cut. So let's say Iranian exports go down to around 1 million barrels per day. It's still a reduction. However, the market is probably not going to take this news of OPEC Plus delaying its decision to June very well. They all remember what happened last summer, and I think we are already starting to get questions about, is this the end of the deal? Which it isn't. It absolutely isn't. But I think the market fears will probably resurface, and we'll probably still be range bound for a few good weeks now.
Amrita, how much of the market is actually tight right now versus how much is anticipating an extension of cuts and a tighter market?
I think that's the difference between last year. Last year, you did have a pocket around Q3, which was extremely tight, but there was a lot of anticipation. This time, the market's actually very tight. If you look at grades around the world or differentials and spreads, they are actually backwardated, a sign of a tight market. And just generally, particularly in the medium and heavy crudes, which is what Venezuela and Iran produce, the market is extremely tight. We just don't have any spare capacity of that quality of crude, especially with the Canadian cuts in place as well. So there are pockets which are probably the tightest we've ever seen in the market in the history of the oil market. But of course, there is a lot of light crude coming out of the U.S. So that side of the market isn't as tight.
Amrita, you were also at CERAWeek last week, so was I, and I caught up with Energy Secretary Rick Perry, and I asked him about his relationship with OPEC, and here's what he had to say.
I think we have a very workable relationship with the membership of OPEC. I try not to get confused about the political side versus the production side of the oil and gas industry. And, you know, we may not always have the same interest in mind.
What is that relationship now?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, Saudi Arabia, or at least OPEC, have similar interests, right? They don't want prices to go to a point that it hurts consumers, and that includes U.S. consumers. There are, of course, political differences between the two sides, as Rick Perry mentioned as well. But when it comes to OPEC, and I think this was said over the weekend as well, a stable price and a fairly high-ish price, let's say in the 60s or even in the 70s, is also required for the U.S. producers to continue growing. So I do think they see eye to eye around that sort of price levels, even if the politics can, of course, be quite thorny.